Hello, my name is Everett Reese. I'm co-founder of Jane.hr. At Jane, we focus on helping organizations hire great fitting people. In fact, one of our mottos is process over placement. And what we mean by that is that, we believe that when you focus on putting in place good, predictive, human-first hiring processes, you really end up in a great place when it comes to being able to consistently bring on great fitting new team members. I'm really excited for you to be able to join in on a conversation about culture building that I had with Dustin Peterson. Dustin is founder of Proof Leadership Group and has become a close partner of ours here at Jane. So check it out.
Dustin Peterson, I founded and lead a company called Proof Leadership Group. And our sole focus is helping people develop an outstanding culture, a place where people thrive, they love coming to work, a place where they want to stay and be for a long time. And so we work with organizations and on all sectors, helping them develop their culture, get clear about what they're trying to build. And we have a team of about 7 people doing that. And grateful to work with you, Everett. We get to overlap in our work, and that's a great collaboration for us.
It's been fun to kind of see how our work jives well with the clients that we've been working on together, where yes, you've been focused on the culture development, even executive coaching, leadership training with clients, and then we're coming in and helping design and manage the recruitment process. And but I've even seen you get more and more involved with some of our shared clients with the final interviews, which you're really focused on at the end of the process, the culture fit side of things, and making sure all that work with the clients actually translating to how they're making hiring decisions.
So our first connection ever was a couple of years back. I had been working with a client and helping them design their culture. And to be fair, this client has got one of the greatest cultures of anybody I work with. And one thing that was consistently true of this client is they hired great people. And it became clear to me that, wow, we can work on culture all day long, but if you don't hire the right people, as Jim Collins said, if you don't get the right people on the bus, then the bus doesn't run, right? Or at least not the way you want it to. And so I remember asking them, like, where do you get all these people? Like, how do you source and hire such outstanding people consistently? That's the secret I want to take to my clients. And by the way, if you did that, then I would have much less work to do, because you hire the right people, helps build the culture. That's when they told me about you. And, and we got to connect, and I realized that you had been sourcing some really outstanding candidates for him. And so it seems like a really obvious partnership to me now. I look back and think, yeah, of course, if you're going to have a great culture, it starts with the hire, who you bring on, and then it's all about how you bring them on and what you do with them after that. So again, great partnership.
Yeah. And then, from our standpoint, if an organization if we start working with an organization, they haven't fully thought through how they've codified or defined their culture. I mean, everybody has a culture, whether they like it or not. But if they haven't been intentional about shaping it, or at least how they're communicating it internally and externally, it can even be a challenge to recruit for that. So it makes our job a whole lot easier when they've taken the time to do the work with somebody like yourself and really help be thoughtful about it, get everybody on the same page, codify it, and continue to work on it and develop it as they grow. So I guess with all that talk about culture, I think it's actually important from a definition standpoint. How do you even define culture? We're not talking about yogurt or probiotics here.
Not necessarily. Yeah, great question. We talk about culture in a lot of different ways across kind of the world of leadership theory, but I think it actually can be very simple. The culture is the personality or the vibe of the organization. It's the character of the organization. More formal definitions say it's all that shared stuff, the shared values, mission, purpose, goals, people. It's all of that stuff coming together. But when I talk with clients, I often tell them, culture is who you are. When somebody shows up to your organization for an hour and they interact with people and they walk around your space, assuming you have an office space these days, what do they walk away and say? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? what is their overall takeaway? If they had to go home to their friend or family member or significant other and describe your organization in 3 descriptive adjectives, what would they say? That's your culture. And I think you made a great point earlier, Everett. You said everybody has a culture, whether they realize it or not. So true, right? We found that we call that organic culture. Everyone's got one. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to direct it in the place it's supposed to go. Culture is like a garden. If you do nothing, it's going to grow anyway. You'll have weeds and you'll have all kind of weird stuff in it. But if you direct it, if you say, this is what we want it to be, more likely to have an intentional culture, which makes a big difference. Culture is that personality.
So how does one sort of define and discover, okay, what is this personality of our organization? You know, actually, what is it currently? Not what do I think it is, but what is that taste that we're leaving with people?
Yeah, you nailed it. People inside the culture are the ones who oftentimes know what it is. They just have never articulated it. And so we do culture audits with the organization to try to say, hey, we want to talk to a group of people or most of the people. It's a small organization, and we want to ask them a series of questions. Questions like, what words would you use to describe this culture? What about this culture is great? What about this culture is challenging? If you were talking with a friend or family member about it, how would you describe it? What did you first notice when you came on board? And in fact, what we find, and you've probably seen this too, Everett, you might speak to this, is that oftentimes the most interesting opinion is that of the new person. Because when you first show up, you haven't yet drunk the Kool-Aid and you're the one that's got the most objective view, right? And so it's like, wow, what is this place? It's fascinating to hear what new people think about culture.
If you were to ask a CEO or founder, what's your culture like? How would you describe your organization's culture? You'll hear one thing, which is what their ideal culture is or what they want it to be. But what's some of do you often see a gap between maybe the aspirational culture and the actual culture?
Yeah, let me shift the word from often to always. There's always a gap, and that's natural, right? Because most of us, when we set out to develop vision statements and mission statements and values for our organization, we establish what we wish it was that it isn't yet, and we say, yeah, we want to be a place that's communicative and warm and empathic and a place where people love to work. And then you get in there and you find that maybe those don't match, that's who we wish we were, that we're not. We all do this, right? We all like to describe ourselves as being maybe more idealistic than we are, maybe a better kind of version of us than we actually are. And so we find that as we go in and start to dig in with the right questions during that culture audit, that true culture starts to emerge. You start to see themes. Sometimes the themes are exactly what you want to see. And people are like, yeah, great, that's what we wanted. But other times you step in what's called an accidental culture, which is that we started to do things we didn't realize, and now it's become part of who we are. For example, you might have people that talk in a certain way or that use certain jargon, or maybe the way you run your business, like people are always late to meetings or they never come to meetings, or perhaps meetings are run in a certain way where it's very top down or bureaucratic, or things that you never set out to do, but because you didn't have a guidepost, didn't have like a clear destination, it crept. You got some culture creep. And so we find that most cultures are actually aspirational, and there's great power in nailing down what exactly is the actual culture, because in the absence of that creates a ton of dissonance for team members. You walk around the organization saying, we care about this, but it's not what they see every day. It starts to lose trust with the organization.
How do you assess which cultural distinctive or shared values are actually helping the organization achieve their desired impact or the value creation that they're trying to create, and which ones are working against that or being counterproductive? It's sort of like, okay, what sticks should we hold on to? Which ones should we attempt to discard?
That's a great question. So first of all, culture trickles down from the top. And oftentimes leaders want to be real democratic about this and create consensus and say, let's gather the team of 25 and let's all decide together what we believe these values should be. I don't believe that's the way to do this. I think the whole role of a leader is to define culture and to help say, hey, this is the type of place we are. And to those that fit it, welcome aboard. Those that don't, are you willing to change? And if not, perhaps this isn't the right place. I think it's got to be defined from the top. It's not a consensus thing. And so part of that comes with meeting with those executives, meeting with that leadership team and helping them get clear. And one way to do that, one question we love to ask is, I want you to think of the ideal team member. And maybe that's an actual person on your staff. Who on your staff represents the culture you want to personify, the culture you want to become? And what about them makes them such a fit? And start to define that out. And everybody can think of that one team member, right? You're like, oh man, we love this person. They're so responsible. They're so authentic. They're so communicative. And when you start to define that ideal state, now you can back it up and say, all right, how are we doing? From our culture audit, which things do we want to keep and which things do we need to get rid of? And only after you've done that culture audit can you start to really create a plan and say, you know what, we need to shift. Step one of the plan is getting the right people. It's attracting the right people in the first place. And I imagine you all have thoughts and process on how you even get those people. How do you source the right candidates? Like, how do you bring in the right people in the first place?
As we're working with an organization on their hiring plan or onboarding a new role, that's one of the first steps in our process, is really trying to flesh out that ideal candidate profile. And sometimes if we can get them to articulate, hey, like who have been people that have really worked out well in this role, and digging into their competencies and their attributes, as well as those that have not, kind of for whatever reason have not worked out well. Like looking at the flip side is also super helpful. And then, obviously sometimes there's new roles where you don't necessarily have those historical comparatives. But even discerning, because if I'm working with the hiring manager, like, well, who have just people been that like, as you think about this role, who are people that come to mind that you've worked with in some professional capacity? Because you can start to at least get to the root of that ideal kind of profile, even through that means. But then it comes down to, from like an actual sourcing standpoint, right? And so, from a sourcing standpoint, it's a mixture of a lot of things that, I mean, there's obviously the hard skills. There's like kind of those baseline hard skills, but even still, sometimes you actually have to help a company open up their eyes to certain hard skills or requirements that are actually less important than some of the softer skills, or culture or shared cultural values or attributes that at the end of the day, like, you just can't train, right? Or it would take forever to train. But from a sourcing standpoint, then you're sort of looking for signals, right? Like, maybe there's other types of organizations where you can sort of say, okay, this person has had, people that have had decent tenures at these sort of types of organizations. We could potentially, it's a signal that they may share this sort of mindset or value. You can look at even things that they may signal in terms of other organizations or volunteer things that they're involved with. Like, there's all these little signals that you can try to use from a sourcing standpoint that can, that increase the probability that they'll be aligned with some value or some shared mission. And then, but obviously, I mean, that's just from a source, that's the first step, but then it's in a more structured actual phone interview, and really full assessment process that you can get more into those details to see like how well aligned somebody is, and where the work that you're doing, through the culture audit, as well as, hey, this is where we're trying to go from a culture standpoint. All that stuff really then needs to get baked in and meshed into the actual hiring process. And that's kind of how the magic all happens. But of course, when I describe it that way, it doesn't really sound like magic. It just sounds like intentional, hard, deliberative work.
That's what it is. It's intentional. What I love about the way you all work and the way you source and screen candidates is that, from what I can gather, most organizations, when they decide that there's a gap they want to fill, they get clear about what they want that person to do, but they sometimes don't get clear about who they want that person to be, right? And I think that's a mistake a lot of organizations make, is they say, we have a gap, we need certain skills, let's hire the right skill set. And you don't want to hire a skill set, you want to hire a culture fit who has a great skill set. That's the best, right? And so I think what I like about the way you guys source, and I've just seen from the work you've done with other clients that we've worked with, is you're not just hiring, you're not bringing people in that have just skill sets that look good on a resume. These people are culture fits. It's who they are. And so something in the way you work with your clients helps clarify that, helps them get clear, like, this is who we want. This is the kind of person that's going to make a good fit. And it's a great method, the way you all do that.
Yeah. Well, and the advantage too, I guess, in our situation is, like, if they're working with you, that means they care about their culture, right? Like they've engaged
That's
with
true.
you to do the work around clarifying all these areas and being intentional about how they're trying to really build and grow well. So it makes our job that much easier, because it just kind of provides, like, I guess, you hire people into a culture, but you also, the whole hiring process is conducted within a culture itself, if that makes any sense. So, like, the atmosphere that, as we get more embedded within a client to help drive and manage these recruitment processes, and as if we're really part of their team, the atmosphere that we're operating in impacts, obviously, the actual outputs of that hiring process. So basically, yeah. So if we get to work on a client that you've already worked with, we love it.
No doubt.
It increases not just the success of the placement, obviously, but the success of the retention of that person's development, of the chances of that being a really good, fruitful, impactful hire. My next question really is, though, how do you actually develop a new cultural distinctive or shared value in your organization? It's like, we want that thing, but how do we actually develop this new organizational habit, so to speak?
We work with executives once they get clear about, hey, here's who we want to be, here's where we're at today. We've got a natural gap now we've created. How are we going to close the gap? We've seen there's a couple things that have to happen. First, executives have to get clear around answers to 6 questions. Why do we exist? Like, what's our purpose as an organization? How do we operate? What are our values, our norms, and our expectations? What do we do? What's our value add to the world, our contribution? How are we going to succeed? What's our strategy? What is our priority today? Like, the one thing we can all rally behind, no matter who we are in the organization. And who is going to do what? Like, who carries what piece of that to go make all that happen? So we work with our executive teams to really get clear on those 6 things. It then becomes a process of doing a number of things. Number one, you've got to oftentimes retreat with your staff and train that into them. Number 2, you got to follow up with training and support. Number 3, you got to provide coaching to help people figure out how to adjust their performance to align with that culture. And so training is a huge aspect of this. Performance management is huge. You've got to help people begin to buy into these ideas and figure out how to apply them in their work. And for some organizations, it's the first time they've heard it. We're always surprised, and yet maybe shouldn't be, when we ask those 6 questions and the executive team themselves raise their eyebrows, like, what? Like, I don't even know what the purpose is, or I'm not clear on the values, or we're not even sure how we would describe our strategy. And so it starts at the top and trickles down from there. That stuff's the gold, by the way. That's where you take that clarity and fuel your recruiting, because now you're getting people that are, when you get on a call and you're interviewing somebody and you turn it over to them and say, you have any questions for us? And they say, yeah, tell me about your culture. Instead of answering with kind of hemming and hawing and having kind of a random answer, you've got a really directed, intentional answer. This is who we are. This is how we operate. This is why we exist. This is what we do. This is going to be your piece of it. And here's our priority as an organization for the next 6 months. And people are like, I get it. I'm clear.
Yeah.
It helps bring them on board.
Yeah, those 6 questions are it's really in a way it's good organizational soul work, so to speak.
Yeah, good way to put it.
That and a lot of times we put off the soul work until a lot of times until stuff starts to break. Um, but it doesn't have to be that way though.
It doesn't. That's an interesting point. The clients we have come to us, I don't know if I can break it down, but I'd probably say it's maybe a 60-40 or 70-30. The 60 or 70 is typically clients who have hit that pain point where culture's reared its head and they're like, wow, we don't like it and we need to change. And then there's that 30 to 40 that are being proactive and intentional. And I love that. And because it doesn't have to be that way. Like you can go out and proactively define these things and get the culture that you want. And by the way, it doesn't have to take a long time. Every new hire that you bring on board is a step toward culture because they come on board, you teach them how you want to be, but you speak as if it's current truth, and they become an ambassador for that new culture.
How have you seen your clients that have really done this culture work and this culture building? How have you seen them use that as a talent attraction tool?
When we have people define those things, those 6 questions, we have them put it into something called a culture book, and we work with them to lay out a book that really describes the organization in a very authentic, jargon-free way. We want it to actually feel like the culture, and the graphic design around it should look like the culture of the organization. That becomes an amazing anchor piece that is the recruiting team members. They can send it off to their potential recruits, people they want to bring in. And we've got one organization in particular that's done that incredibly well. Every person I interview for them, when we're doing a culture interview, they always mention the culture book. They say, yeah, we say, what excites you about this place? They say, the culture book. I read the culture book and I just feel like I've been there, like I get it. So that's a handy tool. We also have people in the job description, and you've probably done this with the work that you all do. They weave their culture into the job description. Instead of it just saying, here's what we need, it says, here's who we need, and here's why we exist, and here's what our organization is about, and here's the values you would need to represent. And so that's where it belongs. It gives people right up front a way to kind of connect with the organization. And I think you all weave that in when you're helping people design job descriptions. It's not just about what, it's about who, right?
Yeah. No, it's yeah, we've seen within the job description itself, certainly weaving that in. We've even linked well, even for certain clients that we share, we've actually linked to the culture book itself. I do know for those that do have that have the culture book, when we're inviting somebody to have an initial conversation with us, in that email, we'll actually ask them to go through that culture book that the organization created with you, which is probably why they all come by the time at the very end of the process
when you ask them to.
Yeah. We like what, but even that in itself kind of is a signal early on in the process how much the person cares, right? Like, have they?
Yeah, it's true.
You know, but when they get on a phone call with us, it's like, well, one, do they remember who this phone call is with? Number one, like, do they remember what job this is related to and what company that or organization it is? But then two, like, what do they know about the organization? Like, have they actually cared enough to do their homework, so to speak? And we're trying to make it easy by basically serving up, hey, here's this well thought out, put together culture book. But yeah, and I think that, I mean, really that, like, an organization's brand as an employer is really should be that an outgrowth of their culture. And if it has been well articulated, everything from the careers page to the job descriptions to their employer profiles on LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, and other places, all should have that content woven into it. And obviously on sites where there's employee reviews, hopefully those reviews, if it's an authentic portrayal of their culture, then those reviews should also echo that. But all these things kind of work together, to me, from a talent attraction standpoint. And I think too that the whole hiring process should be designed to give candidates a taste of that culture. Like it's like what's the taste that we want people, regardless of whether or not they get hired or not. Like what's the taste that residual taste that we want them walking away with, and making sure that the hiring process, the way they're treated as candidates, is all a reflection of that.
Yeah, who doesn't get hired is also important because those people become ambassadors of their experience, right? And I was working with a client recently who forwarded along a culture book from a different organization that will remain nameless. And that organization had a culture book. We weren't a participant in helping to develop it, but they had a culture book and it was awesome. And I looked at this culture book. I thought, this is super cool. And the client sent it along and said, hey, I just wanted you to see that other organizations are doing this. It's a huge win. And my friend's got an interview with this organization coming up. Well, they emailed after the fact. I emailed them back and said, this is awesome. Thanks for sharing. What a great example. She emailed a couple of days later and said, yeah, it is a great example. Unfortunately, they just did their interview and it was not good at all.
Yeah.
Like the organization does not match their culture book. And so sad to say that the recruiting effort is maybe a little bit of a disaster, but the culture book's strong. And I winced a little bit because I thought that's what happens when there's misalignment, right? When you've got, maybe you've done the legwork of the culture audit and you've done the legwork of aligning the executives and you've got a great culture book and you've got the pieces, but you don't circle back to your recruiting. You don't weave it into your HR processes. Then people feel that disconnect. And everyone who doesn't get hired is as much an ambassador, right? Because they go out and tell their story, much like she did with me. And so there's got to be alignment. That alignment is key.
And sometimes though, even like with hiring, for instance, it's like, oh, well, HR and recruiting is not doing their job, but I don't know that specific situation, but they're very easily may not have been able, maybe they never even trained their hiring, like the actual department managers who are doing the interviews on interviewing, hey, here's how we interview here.
Right.
Hey, you're going to have a busy day, but we treat our hiring as super critical. So, 15 minutes before the interview, you should clear your desk, take time to prepare. Here are the types of questions we ask so that we can suss out these cultural competencies that we want to articulate to people, but also see how aligned they are. That may never even, maybe they did a whole bunch of stuff and maybe they just didn't do that. It's hard. It's
never close the loop. That's true.
Yeah. We kind of hinted at this earlier, but some of the companies that we both work at, you'll come in, actually, you or your team will actually be the final interview with a candidate. And that interview is often is pretty much very, like, I shouldn't say is sort of focused on this, but it's like zeroed in on culture fit, really. So how do you actually determine, like, what's your approach to determining if someone is a culture fit or not?
So we do have some clients have us come in and do a culture interview toward the end. And the reason they do that is because we are an objective source outside the organization, but someone who has a clear idea of what that culture is supposed to look like or what they want it to be like. And so we will oftentimes come in and do a 30-minute interview just at the end, just as an additional data point. And we ask a number of questions. Our questions focus around purpose. Like, what is that individual's purpose? What are their values? What things do they care about most? What is their ideal work environment? What type of place do they like to be in? That's that vibe or that personality. And what are their talents? What are the things they do very best? Those are all cultural pieces, right? And so we ask questions to kind of try to suss that out and figure out, is this person the right culture fit? One thing we tell our clients is we are not doing the due diligence on skill fit. That's going to come from you, Everett, and your team, as well as the clients themselves in their interviews. And so they've got to really figure out, is this person a skill fit? Because we're not measuring competence, but we are looking for culture. We're trying to figure out, is this person running to the organization or running from another job? Like, are they really attracted specifically to this culture, and will they be a fit? Because we've done that work with the audit, when we ask those questions around purpose and values and talents and environment, it becomes very clear whether or not that person would be a good fit. Now, it's never a perfect science, and it's certainly not a silver bullet, but we can offer an opinion qualitatively and say, look, here's some things we heard that raise red flags, and here's some things that are reinforcing. The most interesting thing that happens with this is when we send our notes over to the client, almost always, we're not revealing anything really new, but we are affirming things that they felt or heard, but they didn't know what to do with. They'll say, oh, we heard that same thing and we didn't think anything of it, but now that you say it, yeah, that is a little worrisome. Or they'll say, you know what, we totally had that instinct. We felt that that was going to be a good fit. And now you telling us like, yeah, it also seems like a good fit. It gives us confidence with this hire. And so again, it's not an exact science. Culture isn't an exact science, but for sure, it's a step in the right direction towards finding people who are not just a skill fit, but also a good culture fit.
Yeah. And a lot of times, and we've seen this too after your culture interview, sometimes there are further areas that the company or the organization is just going to want to dig into in a more targeted way. So it's not like even using, scientific assessment instruments, you still like those aren't all end all be alls, but they're really just designed to raise certain flags and provide additional areas to probe into. And when you're just kind of looking at the predictability of a hiring process, how well is this entire process going to predict whether or not, somebody's going to be a good hire? And by good hire, they're going to be hitting their performance metrics and staying around for a decent period of time.
Yeah. Yep.
And
I'm with you.
And all those things, having just a well thought out culture that's been properly brought into the hiring process, where there's multiple data point, multiple people involved in providing feedback, but that feedback is kind of around a shared understanding of what we're actually looking for. And it's, and people are interviewed and assessed consistently. Like all that stuff works together to actually produce a very predictable hiring process, instead of something that's just a coin flip, which most unstructured hiring processes are. So it's really, for us, really invaluable work that you folks are doing. For us in our world, we're so focused on hiring, but then we realize, of course, that's just the beginning of the employee journey. you know, how do how should culture itself inform the onboarding process?
Yeah, our whole speech or pitch or maybe platform is that we believe great culture is built on two things. And whenever one of these two things gets neglected, it starts to become dysfunctional. The culture does. The two things are trust and clarity. We find that when organizations have tremendous trust, people know each other, they develop deep relationships very quickly. They're more likely to engage in healthy conflict. They're more likely to say what they really think. People don't hold back. They don't avoid one another. And if it's not a trust issue, it's a clarity issue. People don't know what they're supposed to do or how they're being measured or what their goals are. And so we've taken that and kind of overlaid it into onboarding. Our theory on onboarding is that people within the first 2 weeks need to experience three things. Number one, they need to feel connected. So very quickly, we need to help them feel like they're a part of the team. They need to know people, but know them on a deep level, not just superficial job title, but why are you here and what keeps you here and what is your job and how can I help you, and let's exchange notes and let's figure out who each other is. So we have protocols and ideas for helping clients help their new hires get connected. Number two, they need to get clear. They need to know what their job is, where it fits within the overarching purpose and values of the organization. They need to know what their priorities and their goals are, what those top 3 to 5 buckets are that they need to attack. And they need to know exactly what their next action items are. Like, here's what we need you to do in the next 2 weeks. The third one is kind of an add-on. You've got trust and clarity, connection and clarity. But the third one we realized is new hires need to feel competent. They need to feel like they're doing a good job, because for the first few weeks, all they do is take. They take all your time. They take all your energy. They sit in meetings. They just drain, right? And what happens is you throw off the balance of the universe. You threaten the law of reciprocity because you're taking and not giving back. New hires feel bad about that. And I've felt bad about that before. As a new hire, I'm like, I don't want to ask questions to people because I feel like I'm like a burden on them. What if we can help them give back? Like, what if in the first 2 weeks, we could give them an assignment that shows off their talents, shows off what they do very best, helps them add value to the organization, and helps them get an early win. And what we found is that clients that build in a competence piece that help people feel like they're competent and a great hire, they see the results magnified. And so we always pitch in onboarding, you've got to have connection, you've got to have clarity, but you've also got to have competence, the 3 C's of onboarding. And if they're doing those things, it dramatically increases the likelihood that person is a great retained hire. There's a lot of books out there, first 90 days, what to do. I think you should have that kind of onboarding plan. But we just found if you don't get the first 2 weeks right, it's tough. It's tough to boost engagement and satisfaction.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I thought with your buildup, you were going to say, so we just have them donate their salary for the first 2 weeks back to the company. Just give it right now.
They go buy everyone lunch for a week.
Yeah. No,
this really came from, it's a great thing, right? It came from an experience I had at a job. I came on board to a job and I was taking for that first week, and I started to feel guilty about it. And my manager, bless her heart, she didn't know she was doing it for me, but she was so good about it. She said, "Hey, Dustin, we need you to come to this training, and we want you to lead this training. It's an hour long. It's in an area of expertise, something you know a lot about, and we want you to just own it." I got up there, I did my song and dance. It was something I loved, so my energy was high. They got a ton of value from it. And afterwards, they were going up to her saying, "Wow, we're so thankful for Dustin. What a great hire." And they were patting me on the back, and my confidence soared. I just see the opposite so often. I see a new hire come on, and they just kind of wither for 90 days, trying to find their place. Let's be proactive. And if they want to buy everybody lunch, they can do that too.
Yeah. Anything else, Dustin, that you'd like to say?
No, it's just real affirming to talk with you again, Everett, because it reminded me, like, look, if I could be so daring as to put steps to it, I think if you're going to just create a great culture and hire the right people, step 1, you audit it. Who are you? Step 2, you get clear about that. Say, this is who we're going to be. Step 3, you bring on Everett and his team and say, hey, here's who we want to bring on. Here's the kind of fit. He helps you suss out, like, okay, what skill fit do you need? How are they going to fit in your organization, and where are we going to source them from? He'll help you through that interview process, guide you on, like, these are the hires. Let's do some screening for you. Let's help kind of direct this process. We can come in. We can help provide that culture interview. And once you brought that new hire on, again, with Everett's help and his team's help, we're happy to help you onboard that person, get them trained, coached, and ready to just go hit the ground running. I think it's a great thing, Everett. That was reaffirmed to me today as we talked, that this is a good way to go about being intentional. Not just building culture, but getting the right people into it. So I'm glad we had the call. I appreciate it. It's a good conversation.
Thanks so much for listening in. If you found any of this helpful and want to chat with us, check out jane.hr/culture-building. That's jane.hr/culture-building.